Good morning. I'm delighted to be here. I'll start by saying I'm not a structural engineer, but I'm a geotechnical engineer. I work with structural engineers for many years, but I'm delighted to be here. And based on the discussion so far, I think I'm in the right place. And I'm also probably going to be talking about many of the topics that have already been brought up, but I'll just give you my 2 cents. So I'm a geotechnical engineer, civil engineer. After about 20 years with Arup, I thought I needed to do more to actually break that sort of boundary of influencing outwards. And that's kind of what I'm doing. And I'm now leading the International Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure, which is an NGO that focuses on working with engineers globally. So it's a global organization, and we kind of engage with and engage on behalf of engineers on the topics of sustainability, resilience, climate action in the infrastructure sector. And so the organization has been around for about 5 years, coming to 5 years now. It's been founded by a professional association, the American Society of Civil Engineers, the Institution of Civil Engineers, but also other organizations such as the Global Covenant of Mayors. So it's not just engineers, got strong engineering core, but we're not just engineers because we cannot do everything, in fact, we can't just be engineers influencing outwards. We just need to build bridges, no pun intended. So I love the fact that, this organization is really focused on action, but we do connect to action through advocacy, through thought leadership. So many of the things that have been discussed, you'll see in the presentation I'm kind of touching upon. And I want to bring up a few things and efforts that are already happening in the international space and that I might be interested in. The clicker. I think that I kind of summarize a little bit my journey, I really kind of putting myself out there and doing this advocacy, lobbying, and this is quite difficult, as someone was pointing out, but really exciting. So many of the things on this slide will not surprise you. You will have seen them before, so I'm not going to dwell on it. The investment gap, the fact that the investment gap needs to be even greater if we want to meet the global agendas, the cost of disasters, and those are only just the direct losses. The indirect losses are many more. Loss of education, loss of work, especially in countries that are more hit by disasters globally. But one thing I'd like to bring to your attention is the climate overshoot. So this is something that for me was probably one of my key learnings from one of the IPCC scientists at last COP. She made me think about the climate overshoot, which is going over the 1.5 threshold, which is something that in the policy circles is not really being discussed as much. But in the IPCC report, 90% of the climate mitigation pathways to 2100, 90% of them predict that we will go over 1.5. But then the climate overshoot then is just how long will we be breaching that threshold? And, it's for us, we in engineers, we have technical measures and strategies and things, to try and, decarbonization and all of those things. But the time that we'll be breaching that will then make it worse. We might even get to a tipping point where we know we're thinking about system, right? So what about thermal resistance of species? We'll go over, the species will be affected in ecosystems. Ecosystems don't bounce back instantly, even if the temperature comes down. So these are things that I think, we need to be considering. And they're adding to the urgency, to the moral imperative, right, of doing things differently, of really pushing the boundaries. So, and another thing I wanted to maybe just flag, you'll be familiar with the planetary boundaries. The scientists that developed that framework, they've also now recently put forward this safe and just Earth system boundaries, to also flag that we are already breaching many of those planetary boundaries, and there is also an aspect of justice. So in the climate one, for example, We might be still just safe, but we are not actually just, because the populations that are feeling the biggest impacts are the ones in the emerging economies, in the vulnerable communities around the world. So this is a slide that, as I said, I go around and then speak to, try and influence outwards. So I have a spiel for why engineers really are important, our role, our credibility, and so forth. So I'm not going to do this today, but this is an opportunity. So I know it's urgency is that beyond scaremongering, there is the opportunity. We've got an opportunity to do something about it, but we need to start now. And so it's the opportunity to do it right. And I love the IABSE mantra that they go like, do project right, which is what we normally do, but also do the right projects, which is what we need to influence. So it's, I think, and one thing I want to say about this is like wherever I go, if I talk to policymakers, to investors, insurance, you name it, civil society, wherever I say I'm an engineer, I want to talk about engineering, everyone listens. They want to hear from us. So one thing, I'll be talking about several different things. Obviously the guidance and standards and codes is important. It's an enabler, or shifted and practice. Someone mentioned it. We know they're not climate ready. We know that it takes time to develop a new standard. So what can we do now beyond minimum compliance? And it's just incurring costs, but it's also convincing people that the costs that we incur are necessary. And sometimes it's sharpening pencils to just, like using circular economy principles, use less stuff. All of those things are things that we need to be using to make this argument. So one thing is that some of the standards are emerging, obviously not at the speed that is required. And I think, one of the things is important to consider when we think about climate action. There is climate mitigation and adaptation. There will be trade-offs, not just with climate adaptation and mitigation, but also trade-offs with other policy drivers, biodiversity loss, right? We want to so there will be trade-offs, and those trade-offs are not really fully understood, and this is quite urgent that we do understand them and we embed them in standards. So a couple of examples. PAS 2080 was mentioned by someone here. I think this standard is a good example of, well, first of all, now is open source, which is great. Like we need to democratize that access to knowledge, access to resources as much as possible. We need to be more generous, I think, with our expertise as well. We don't have time. There's tons of work around. There will be work for everyone. So it's kind of like also being a bit more generous. And then like the other aspects of PAS 2080 that I like is that they take that life cycle view that they now mention, even though it's about carbon management, they mention co-benefits of climate resilience and adaptation, they mention nature-based solutions. So they're starting to kind of bring in the different elements into the PAS 2080. And the procurement clause. For me, the procurement clause, helping clients to really embed that into the kind of asks and the documents, although it takes time. I agree, but like the procurement, I think for me is one of those kind of opportunities to ask for the right things. So another example, this is something that I find interesting, that the American Society of Civil Engineers and the equivalent of the Met office in the UK, so NOAA, basically they are working there, they've partnered. NOAA is not just partner with the engineers, they also partner with insurers, so they've been very forward-thinking about how do we translate the climate science into something that is usable, actionable by different practitioners. So in this case, engineers, civil engineers, they're now talking and they're thinking, okay, NOAA, you have climate data, you've got analysis, you've got data products. What do engineers need to then actually embed them in their codes and standards? So I think this is a very interesting thing, and it should be, I think, it's got potential to be replicated, which is, and this is another point. we need to find something that works or it's useful like this, and then replicate it as fast as possible, because we don't have time, we need to scale things up fast. So MBSs, biodiversity loss, nature positive engineering. So I think for me it is pushing the boundaries here a little bit more as well. You know, like we as engineers, I don't think we can decouple engineering from nature. We certainly cannot decouple nature from climate change. We cannot decouple nature from, you know, it's just, you've seen the planetary boundaries, right? They're all connected. So it's just pushing it from nature-based solution that perhaps is a bit generic, where you might be just thinking you include natural elements, or you don't do anything that is to the detriment of natural ecosystem, to nature positive, where you got a bit more of a reciprocity, where you might be using ecosystem services, but then you're also giving something back, ensuring that everything that we do overall has got a nature positive kind of net biodiversity gain. I like what the UK is doing, although it's emerging for infrastructure. How do you measure all of those things? Yes, but I think, you know, that's kind of where the profession need to be pushing the boundaries. And then, you know, this kind of ecology-inspired approach to engineering. So on this topic, obviously, there's people that are already thinking about this. Probably the solutions that will be scaled up will be probably more on the spectrum of green-gray. So, you know, it's kind of complementing gray infrastructure that already exists with the natural elements. There is a community of practice that exists. It's called Green-Gray Infrastructure Community of Practice. They're starting to publish useful case studies and guidance. Obviously, the Engineering with Nature and the Army Corps of Engineers have been around for 10 years now. They've been actually quite pioneering if you think about, you know, thinking about engineering with nature. And we, our organization will probably do a project that fleshes out what does that mean to be nature positive engineering. What is the approach that we need to be taking to do in kind of designing things differently, or conceiving things differently, or maintaining, or, you know, it's the whole life cycle, whole system view. Then raising the voice of engineers. So this has been probably the first comment that's been made, you know, like you got client pressure, you don't really have a direct link to governments or high-level fora. How do we raise the voice of engineers? And this is something that, you know, pretty much my day job, to try and raise the voice of engineers globally. And I'll give you a couple of examples. One is the Sendai framework, which is the UN framework, less well known than the SDGs, but quite important because it's the framework for disaster risk reduction and resilience. And is a framework, actually was launched the same year, 2015, and up to 2030 as the SDGs. So last year they had a midterm review, and they were asking for voluntary contributions. And so one of the UNDRR, which owns the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction that owns this, asked us, we have never heard from engineers on this framework. Can you contribute? So what we did, in partnership with the Institution of Civil Engineers, we rolled out a multilingual global survey last year to gather the views of engineers on the Sendai framework, the topics covered in the framework, how engineers can help. And then we produced a publication that was extremely well received, and we got invited to convene a side event at the fringes of the UN General Assembly at their headquarters in New York. And then engineers, and that's the photo, engineers-led, convened, you know, like where we had India, Pakistan, the US, national government, we had regional government, city government, private sector, academia. So that's the type of engineering-led convening that we really need to do more of, because they want to ground the discussion in implementation. And this is something that we can do. And that's the opportunity to communicate then. You know, once we are at the table, we ought to communicate in a way that they can be grasped. Otherwise, just we're missing an opportunity. So this is another initiative that is backed by the UNFCCC. It's called Race to Resilience. So the Race to Resilience is, as I said, is a global initiative. There are 34 partner initiatives, I think, and then covering about 200 organizations. And IABSE, my organization, is the only partner initiative that is about engineering and is about infrastructure. And their goal is to really catalyze action of non-state actors. So what do non-state actors can do actually to track progress, to demonstrate that something is being done to implement climate resilience and adaptation to the benefit of people and natural ecosystems. So they've got a 4 billion target for people whose resilience will be improved by 2030, and they're trying to track it to then inspire more people to take action. That's kind of what this is. And we, as a contribution, we have now a report series that is called the Climate Resilient Infrastructure Report. And every year we publish and we launch a couple examples of how it could be done in practice to really try and share knowledge, best practice, inspire others to actually do the same, but also communicate it in a way that is appealing to clients or governments or decision makers overall. So, and I know that the conference has a youth chapter and a youth award and young engineers. So one of the things, we definitely need to empower the younger generations. And we're working with young engineers on this another global campaign called Engineering Change. So this is us working with the World Federation of Engineering Organization, their youth chapter, the Young Engineer chapter. It's a youth-led initiative, although we are supporting them and kind of giving them a home. But this is an initiative that really wants to push young engineers or empower young engineers to become advocates for climate action. Not just advocates in international fora, but also advocates in their own workplace. So it's kind of encouraging them to ask, I want to be working on projects that are good for society or have got sustainability at their core or got resilience and adaptation at their core, and also ask to be upskilled or ask to be doing things differently. So something that we did, we launched a report when we launched the campaign, but also reached out to young engineers globally and their managers on a 360 feedback type of survey. And something that gives me a lot of hope is that the young engineers, that's the spidergram is showing, what motivates young engineers, to kind of upskill in sustainable development related competencies, which is overwhelmingly sense of purpose and job satisfaction. So for talent retention in the industry, this should be a message to the employers as well. You really need to listen and kind of like try and work in the space where the young generation, the future professionals, do want to be involved. So, and then now on the advocacy, and you probably recognize many of these messages, or key messages are the same things that we talked about in this conference so far, and today particularly. So we want to really have some simple set of key messages that engineers can go out and influence and kind of put forward to policymakers, to investors, to decision makers, to kind of like, we need to make our positions heard. And so this is kind of a bit of a tool that we use to kind of put those key messages forward. And because of the space where I operate, I've got access to, for example, these key messages that I will go through quickly, have been now added to a policy brief. I co-authored the policy brief that is going to the G20 Brazil. So the G20 Brazil, I'm not saying that they're going to see exactly the same words, but they will receive a paper that includes messages from the engineering community. So there is a way for us to speak up and actually make our views heard. In this case, the topic that we're focusing is try and put forward messages on how to unlock finance, which is obviously one of the things that is being talked about the most, in fact, in recent conversations for sustainable and resilient infrastructure. So the systemic, I'm not going to kind of dwell too much on this because we talked about this actually a little bit in the conversation just before. But the systemic approach, obviously, you know, like I think we as engineers, we should be advocating for that type of projects, but also try and make it real for the policymakers, give them examples. So what does that look like when you take a systemic approach to investment? And then going back to the trade-offs that I was kind of mentioning before, you know, shall we as a community, as engineers, because we know what works, what doesn't, you know, what might cause impacts, etc. Can we maybe collectively come up with examples or ways to explain how this might work to the decision makers? So closing the adaptation finance gap, this is something that is way beyond way behind, not beyond. I wish it was beyond, but it's behind. It's behind the investment on decarbonization at zero. And also the countries that need it the most are the ones that where the funding and finance is least available because it's more risky for investors to actually make those decisions. And so I think as a community, we can help by actually showing through climate risk assessment more robust, using technology or more data and the kind of modeling side of things, and you know, using our knowledge of how infrastructure works to really kind of enhance those risk assessments, and also boosting the confidence of investors that are going to make those decisions, because they are kind of like being sort of backed by the technical community. And then communication, as you said it before, the communication of risks and return and the benefits delivered, etc., because that will be really unlocking this type of decisions. You know, like if we're clear in communicating what the benefits are, if we work at quantifying what is currently not being quantified, you know, that's going to help. This upskilling, you know, you'll see that many of these topics that we discussed, you know, we are definitely working in this space. So if anything that I say, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to go in detail, but I'll be around if you want to talk to me about this. But, you know, like on getting involved, you know, in some way, I'm really happy to speak after this. So this is, we know that there is we're talking about finance flows and we're unlocking finance, etc. But once those flows have been unlocked, the next big bottleneck is engineering capacity and capability. Because, you know, if we are not ready to deliver and we don't have the skills to deliver, then, you know, you might have the money ready to go, but you don't have the capability and the capacity to deliver in the countries where you need to develop the infrastructure. So, I mean, that's kind of something that needs to be said, and needs to be said many times so that it lands. And so, and to be able to actually make the good argument, you need data. You need to demonstrate where are the engineers, what skills do they currently have, what skills are needed. You know, you were talking, Janet, about the, you know, what skills are changing, the engineer's profession is changed, etc. But what I think, you know, is needed now is to bring it to, we need the data, we need to agree on what competencies engineers need, and obviously there are different avenues to implement this. There's the professionals who need to be upskilled, there's the future engineers in education, so the engineering curriculum aspect, etc. But I think that where we can really make it real is when we start to collect the data and then monitor progress. Monitor progress, how many engineers are in different countries of the world, what competencies they have got, and then work with, well, I suppose it's a coalition of partners, including academia, civil society, the private sector, to try and work out how we might, what skills are needed and how we might upskill the workforce scale. This is, by the way, something else that we will be working on, becoming a little bit of a go-to place for this type of data. Boundaries of collaboration, I'll be very fast. I don't know how much time I've got, but collaboration is easily, deep collaboration, which is jargon, is easily said, it's very difficult to do, very difficult to do. I mean civil society, right? I'm in the NGO space now. I know in private sector we compete, you know, like collaboration might not be possible. Going back to the generosity point that I was making, I think we are at the point, that we are really at the point where we have to take a bit more risk, I know. It's difficult to do for engineers. We need to be pushing boundaries. We need to be prepared to collaborate in a way that we haven't done before, and not just in the private sector. This is everywhere. You know, we need to go beyond our individual agendas and our just organizational boundaries. I know it's difficult to do, but that's kind of what is required at this point. And obviously we've got engineering is one of the bubbles, but there's so many other bubbles and other specialists and other disciplines that we need to be collaborating with in ways we haven't before. Transdisciplinary approaches is being used, but you know, it's very difficult to do, but that's kind of where we need to be heading. Last slide is, are we raising to the challenge? So like we are engineers, and we are those with the solutions, we are the technical know-how, we will be on the hook for implementing. But I think, you know, we really need to be now communicating, advocating, influencing, campaigning, because that's what's required of us. I think that's kind of where we need to be doing more. We are raising to the challenge, we are doing loads as an industry. The whole conference is about solutions and approaches, but you know, I'm kind of pushing for more, you know, to kind of get out of our comfort zone. Quickly on the slide, we've got yet another survey that we did, where we asked engineers, where can you contribute the most? And obviously there are obvious SDGs, where engineers said, I can definitely do infrastructure, definitely do cities, I can definitely do water and energy. But the respondees didn't think that they could contribute to other SDGs that are like poverty, that are kind of gender, or, you know, actually, no, we should think we can contribute to those, you know, and that's kind of part of pushing the boundary and raising to the challenge. Thank you.